the latest episode of HBO's The Last of Us, which just premiered this past Sunday on the streaming network HBO Max. And we are super excited to discuss this show continuously every week. I know we're both very, very high on the series thus far. The first two episodes did so many incredible things in terms of an adaptation standpoint. And of course, just from a storytelling standpoint, with the inclusion of some new things and some new elements that we weren't necessarily expecting. But episode three had a bit of a different conversation around it. Many people who had saw this episode early, many critics and journalists were praising this one, in particular saying this is easily the strongest episode of the season, and it very well may be one of the best episodes of TV I've seen in recent memory. There was so much conversation around it. And so before we talk about the details of everything that happened with this week's episode of The Last of Us, just want to start and talk about our general big picture thoughts. And so I'll pass it over to you. What did you think about the latest entry of The Last of Us?
Man, we're only in episode 3 of The Last of Us, and it may already be the greatest video game adaptation that we've ever seen. It is impressive what they're doing. It is, again, man, it's one of those things where all you have to do is care and take care of it and know the story you're trying to tell. And they're doing that, man. I think they have all the right people involved. I think it's crazy after 3 episodes that this TV show has impressed audiences and critics. Really, at first it was just the first 2. And they add this one, which is probably one of the more also like emotional episodes, that we've seen so far. If not the most emotional episode that we've seen so far, man. It's a tremendous way to adapt the story between Frank and Bill, because this does not check out like this in the video games. I'll tell y'all that. This is not the same thing. They do something different here, but not only that, they do something more meaningful. They do something that adds a little bit more weight to it. They do something that adds to the story of what Bill and Frank was and who they were, man. And so it's very much one of those episodes that I know I'm going to watch again, because it just made me feel something different that I couldn't even imagine. I thought I would feel out of The Last of Us. I am coming here from the video games expecting, I don't know, something, but this gave me something else entirely that I was not ready for. And I have to commend them for that, man. I think the writers, the cast, and the crew being able to do things in just one episode, the way that they do it here, is so well done. It's so story driven. This wasn't an episode that was like, the action is over the top. None of that. It was all about the world building. It was all about the relationship building. And to be able to do that the way they did it here in this episode, it's impressive, man. So yeah, long story short, I loved it. I thought it was tremendous. I need to sit on it a little bit longer in terms of recent memory greatest episode, just because I don't know, a lot of TV has happened, but in it's competitive out here. But I really did love this episode, man, and I can't wait to see what they do episode 4 now. If this is the energy we own, let's do it.
Pine Barrens, college, the Battle of the Bastards, the Reigns of Castamere, Ozymandias, Felina, Face Off. These are some of the greatest episodes of TV I've seen in the past 25 years from some of the greatest shows. And coming into this, hearing that this particular episode of The Last of Us could be held in comparison to what we've seen out of those shows, it's a high bar to set.
Mm-hmm.
And after I watched it, after sitting there for 75 minutes and experiencing it, I'm here to say they are absolutely right. Episode 3, season 1, The Last of Us, long time. It's one of the finest episodes of TV I've ever witnessed, personally. Can't speak for anybody else, but this is damn near a masterpiece in terms of storytelling, emotion, character beats, even action, which is included briefly. Mm-hmm. Everything that you can want out of an emotional experience and investing into what you see happen on screen. They just did such a masterful job at getting you to buy in so early to this story. And as I was watching it, it didn't even feel like I was watching a TV series. It felt like I was watching a motion picture. That's how engaging and enthralling it was for me. And by the end of it, I was a fucking emotional wreck. I was through and done. I couldn't do anything else last night because of how much of an emotional toll it took on me to witness the
Mm-hmm.
story between Bill and Frank, who are the focal points for this particular episode. And they achieved so much with such a small amount of time, not only for them, but also really for the primary characters that we are following and that we will continue to follow. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's an isolated story. Yes, it does sort of take place outside of the linear timeline that we're following, but it also served a greater purpose and ultimately fed the larger story that they're unfolding in the season of The Last of Us. And I was astonished. Truly, I was astonished. There's few hours of TV that have wrecked me that much. I've only come across it a handful of times. I named a few of those episodes. There might be a few others that I've recently come across from other series that I'm just, really high on, but this for me is now included in that list just because of everything that they achieved. And it's really awe-inspiring to see them do it so early. That
Mm-hmm.
that type of achievement you don't typically see out of shows until their later seasons when they really get their stride. You get the directors and the filmmakers, they by season 3 and 4 and 5, it's like we know what we're doing. We know how these characters are, we know how they function, we know all the ins and outs about them. So we can really craft something that's going to be just different and unique and hit you emotionally in all the right places. And the fact that they achieved this within 3 episodes of this series it's quite a feat. And you can't even necessarily say, well, yeah, you can leverage the video game because it is so different. This is pretty much an original story. Like
Mm-hmm.
lifted from the game, but none of this is in the game. Like none of this. And so I just can't,
Exactly.
I really can't put it into words how impressed I was by this hour of TV. It's really that damn good. And if you haven't bought into The Last of Us yet, this is the episode that will get you to buy in. If you are turned off by the horror and the frights and the eeriness of the series, this is the episode that'll show you it's about much more than any zombie shit, than any affected shit. It's about so much more than that. It's a love story at the end of the day, which they've always set out to do with the video games, and it's being perfectly, I think, translated thus far in this TV series. I'm amazed by it. With that said, let's get into the spoilers of this. Let's talk about it in detail. If you've not seen episode 3 of The Last of Us, go watch it on HBO Max, come back and finish the rest of our conversation. Before we get to Bill and Frank, I think we should start
Mm-hmm.
with Joel and Ellie because we left off with those two characters in last week's episode. We saw the death of Tess, her sacrifice. And this episode actually opens with a really tender moment of Joel sort of acknowledging his love for Tess. And he builds this monument of rocks to really just sort of acknowledge her, acknowledge the loss that he just suffered, and sort of mourn her for the very brief moment that he's able to do so. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, we get a small but important interaction between Joel and Ellie, because I think that this is the first time that they're truly building their relationship. So far, Ellie has just been a package for Joel. She's just been an objective. Get her to this place so that I can get this thing. But now, as we know, based off of the video game, there's much more to their relationship than that. And they finally started to really lean into that. They're starting to get to know each other. Ellie's asking questions. We're starting to
Mm-hmm.
get an understanding of her outlook on life versus his. She's much more optimistic and has a sense of wonder and awe. He's obviously very pessimistic and hard by his whole life. We're seeing that contrast in really unique ways here in just their conversations and dialogue. What did you make about just the brief time that we spent with them in the first about 10 minutes of this episode and just seeing their relationship develop in this way?
Yeah, it's so interesting how, how big I think the loss of Tess actually looms over this episode, more we'll talk about later, but there's so much that Joel never spoke to, and in some ways will never speak to. It's just who he has become as a person who is now closed off from the world and has been closed off from the world since the death of Sarah. And now we're finally here, I think, in this moment where him and Ellie are actually alone for the real first time. There is no Tess. And now he's like, okay, there's still part of him that like had a daughter. I think what one of the things I really like about the open where they're in the woods, like his jacket is over her knees as it keeps her warm, even though, they're not close or anything yet. But it was just like, oh, this is already at least something is happening. She is under his care. And I think that's a very important outlook in the way to look at things right now, right? Where Joel looks at it as right now, she's still kind of a job. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have a job to do. You need to get here. I need to take you here at this spot. And that's all I can do for you. But like you said, she sees the world so much different from him, man, because she's never experienced anything. And in some ways, in Joel's mind, she's experienced everything. And they're so different, but so similar at the same time that it's like a tornado of people. And they're always going to clash heads. And then sometimes they get along, and then they won't. It's just very interesting to see their dynamics. And we definitely see that in this episode, man, when we open up with him. I love how she's asking questions, but I also love how like he doesn't answer all of them, because that's how somebody who is closed off would act. You know what I mean? That's how long it would take somebody to open up. And a lot of what Joe never even opened up to Tess. You think he's going to open up to Ellie day one? You know what I'm saying? And they don't do that. They really do take a slow approach. He's not, a lot of times he's not even answering questions about himself. He's answering questions about the world, or you know what I mean? Something else. It's not really always about Joel yet. And so, yeah, man, I think they're just doing a good job portraying what Ellie and Joel are supposed to be. And yeah, they're really doing it beat for beat. And I love that about it.
Yeah, it's great to just see her just be so amazed by an airplane. She said, dude, you got to go in the sky. I've never gotten a chance to do that. And Joel is just jaded by all of that because he's like, planes, they were so terrible. You rode coach, you were in the middle seat, you just hope to get a window seat. Like that's his outlook on life, and she's younger and his experience much less. And she's looking at it from a half glass full sort of standpoint. And I think that definitely informs just the way that they play off of each other. As you said, that's going to be something that we continue to see develop and grow over the course of these next few episodes. Another thing that I do want to point out is the moment in which they go inside I believe it's like a gas station or just a place in which Joel has been to before to get some supplies, just to sort of stop for a quick second on their hike. Ellie goes into this basement. She's looking around, searching for stuff. She finds some tampons, which, Joel's not looking for that, but she's obviously gonna pick that stuff up. She's a young woman, a girl. She goes down into this basement and sees an infected person. He's trapped under a pile of rocks. He's pretty much helpless and probably slowly but surely dying. And we see this almost sadistic side of Ellie come out, where she is kind of toying with this infected. She makes the incision cut across his forehead, and we see the fungi start to pop out of his head, which still just it's gross to see. I can't get over that. It's really weird to see that, the cordyceps growing out of his head like that. Yeah. And then we see her, sort of stab him, and ultimately kill him. But she does so in a really slow way, almost again in a really sadistic way. And then another piece of this episode, Ellie just wants a gun. She wants a gun so badly. And Joe's like, no, you're not getting a gun. Stop asking. Even Tess denied her, you're not getting a gun. And she ultimately does find a gun when they make it to Bill and Frank. She gets Frank's gun. What do you make about just the way that they're portraying that? Because in playing the video games, as we know, Ellie's vicious. She's very savage, and she gets to worse places and darker places over the course of time. What do you think about just the small ways that they alluded to that?
I think this is one of the reasons they chose Bella Ramsey, because again, we've seen her in Game of Thrones, but we know that she can play a character that is, a cute kind of little girl, but also he might be just a little bit of crazy in there. You know what I'm saying? There might be a little bit of sadisticness to you, but I think this is, again, another good job, because it shows it's very clear that Ellie hasn't lived the life that most of the other people on Earth right now, right? She's quite almost literally born in an apocalypse. And her childhood is different than most. And in some ways, her naiveness, like you said, it comes from the awe and wonder. I've never been on a plane. I've this car looks like a spaceship, you know what I mean, kind of type thing. But then the next second is, I think she's never really had too many interactions that allowed her to be completely on the human side of things that we've always been a part of, right? Like we went to preschool and played with kids,
social skills, right?
Social skills, and did these normal things. Ellie, maybe a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Not in the way that the rest of the world used to. And so I think we're just seeing glimpses of that come out, where she's not a normal girl, at least not normal to us. And in some ways, she's probably the new normal, right? Let's say they throw in a new character who's Ellie's age next episode after that. That's not a flashback. Right? And I'm sure that girl is probably just like her. She doesn't know what's going on in the world. There are some things that she also just wants to test, that she's never seen test. Ellie has never seen the news. Ellie has never seen a viral video of people getting shot, you know what I'm saying, at some random concert. You know, she just hasn't lived through that. And I think part of her nature is inquisitiveness. And I'm gonna cut this thing open and see what happens. Oh, that's what it like. She never got the little kid, you know, the chocolate pies running around the making mud. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? She never got that. And so this is her new playground. This is now where she lives. This is her. Oh, what is that? What's that thing over there? Oh, what happens if you stab this thing in the eye? It used to be a human, but now it's just a flower in the earth kind of type thing. What happens if you poke it? You know, kind of type thing. So I love that we're seeing those sides of her because I think the world around her just kind of makes sense.
Yeah, in this world, she's just never had that opportunity to experience those things. And so it's now becoming her experiment. Like, what happens when I do this? What'll cause this to occur? You know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's always interesting because Bella Ramsey, her facial expressions do so much. Her eyes, she has just such visually emotive eyes that can really
Yeah.
express those feelings that we're talking about right now. And in the official Last of Us podcast on HBO from episode 1, they talked about the fact that when Joel beat up that Phaedra officer when he was, testing them
Mm-hmm.
and testing their temperature, Ellie felt activated by seeing somebody be so protective of her in a visceral way, in a really violent way. Like that just unlocked something in her. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that particular event, in addition to just the way that she's been brought up and her upbringing, has just largely influenced her perspective on the world. It's a world of
Yeah.
violence. It's a world of survival, and so these things that she's slowly but surely doing that are alluding to bigger character beats down the line, I think are brilliantly placed because it's small
Mm-hmm.
stuff now, but when you rewatch this, you'll be like, yeah, it started there. We started to see kind of these things come to fruition in those smaller beats earlier in the season. Of course, we have to talk about Bill and Frank. And what I think is so interesting about this week's episode is sort of how they flipped the formula. The first two episodes had those cold opens, which took place in the past, and then we come to the present day. This episode is largely focused on the past, and we actually
Mm-hmm.
start in the present day because this really is about Bill and Frank's story. Now, in the video game, Bill is a major character. He is somebody that you come across in the game, and he's there to achieve a purpose. He helps out Joel. He gets him supplies. He gets him a car. That stuff doesn't inherently change in this episode, but what they did do is vastly expand the backstory of Bill and Frank, who's a
Right.
character who's really only alluded to in the video game that we don't actually see. And also in the video game, it's alluded to that Bill and Frank had a loving relationship, that they were partners, that they had a gay relationship with each other, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not really expanded. It's only implied. What they decided to do here was to really focus in on that and give us this love story between these two characters and really just unlock and open up something that you just really couldn't achieve in a video game. It's not the time that you can set aside for something like this because we are playing as Joel, and that's what we want to do. We want to go and shoot zombies and survive and find supplies and open up drawers and find like this tape that we can, heal ourselves later down the line and stock up on ammo. You don't want to take the time to go and just like watch an hour long cutscene. It's going to be
Right.
boring, right? But you can do that in the medium of TV. And they just create so many moments of just impact and love. And we get to know a lot about Bill, how he hates the world, he hates people. And so like this doomsday situation is like his dream scenario.
Yeah.
Pretty much the entire planet is gone. He can go and loot the Home Depot and take supplies and create this fortress for himself until he meets somebody that makes life worth living. He meets Frank, and instantly Frank is able to clock Bill just from the jump, like, oh yeah, he's gay. He's gay. I know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I see something in this guy because of the way he looks at me, the way he's treating me. There's something different here. And then we just see their relationship sprout from there on. There's so many moments to talk about here, but I just want to start generally, man. How did you feel about this really expansive backstory that they gave these two characters? Because again, none of this is in the game. This is the biggest deviation from the game that we've seen thus far.
Yeah.
How did you feel that they executed and landed this?
What what a good job, man. In I think this is why people you have to call it an adaptation sometimes, you know what I mean? They adapted this. This is not beat for beat what happened. If not, Joel would have walked in the door and got, you know what I mean, hit by the trap upside down and had to fight some zombies off. This is not that. This is literally Bill and Frank and what their story could mean in the world that they have built within this TV show, man. It's so like what is a lot of times in part of Last of Us as a story, even in the video games, is what is what does post-apocalyptic love look like? That is one of the things that exists in the games. They do give us that here a little bit in the first couple episodes with Tess and him, or Tess and Joel. You know what I'm saying? There's always a little love here and there. But what does it look like here for real with Bill and Frank? I think they took the opportunity of, again, we had never seen Frank in a video game. We had no idea what that man even looked like. And they gave it a complete backstory of to how, shoot, and they even changed their relationship a little bit too, of how, you know, we get Bill and Frank. And I love that they were able to tell such a romantic story so beautifully in such dark scenario. I think that's also what makes this so good. It's, to be honest, is like a lot of these stories in post-apocalyptic love don't have happy endings. But in a lot of ways, this was like the happiest ending that you could ask for.
It's very romantic, right?
Between these two characters. And it really is breathtaking in that way. It's amazing in that way to be able to think about that. Because I can imagine being a writer of The Last of Us and you go, it has to end tragically. That's just how it has to. Not in this case, man. They knew what they had. They knew the actors that they had. They knew what they were doing, and they went with it, man. I'm very happy with the direction they went here. And I love how poetic it is too. You know that's one of the things I love about all of this is what not only the story you're trying to tell, but the takeaway from that story, and that's the poetry to me. That's what it is. And in here, you can find beauty even in, you know, the darkest times and even in the situation that they were in, man. So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and I think they did a tremendous job again adapting a very good story.
Listen, give Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett all the Emmys right now. This is just an extraordinary performance. They deserve so much praise and recognition for what they were able to achieve here. The character of Frank coming into Bill's life, a person who was extremely closed off to the world, hated people, didn't want anything to do with any of this. Like he had a very self-sufficient lifestyle. He was able to make sure that his home was locked down and protected. He made sure that he can go get the supplies that he needed when he needed them. He's an excellent cook. Clearly, he can make steak and frits and potatoes whenever he wants. He can have these really, really great meals. He's a very artistic person. He can play the piano. He can sing. He can do all these things. And so he was good. He's also extremely conservative, as we see. You can see the small things that makes him, it makes sense as to why he is the way that he is, right? But then you bring along this Frank character who's the complete opposite of him and opens up a love that Bill never knew even existed, and does so in such a delicate and tender way that you just don't normally see, as you said, in the darkest of times and in the worst of circumstances, in a world so bleak that has literally no hope. They've crafted this love story that has all the hope that sustains over time, that grows and evolves, because we get the flash forward 3 years later. They're arguing with each other, which is what happens. That honeymoon phase in the beginning, shit was over in probably 6 months, you know? Now they have to deal with the realities. And you have Bill, who just wants to protect what he has. And Frank is like, we can't just survive here. We have to live. We have to open this up. Let's invite people. Let's bring people here. Let's do something a little bit more. He's getting Bill literally to change and become a better person. And the small details is what I loved here, because by the end of the episode, when we reach sort of the end of their lives, when they're older, and you look at the house on the inside, the interior versus how it was in the beginning, Frank walks in there and he just wipes across the countertop and it's dust everywhere. Like, the house is maintained, but Bill doesn't clean up necessarily. He just maintains it. It's literally a fortress for him. When Frank comes along, over time, he's painting artwork. They paint the walls, you know, stuff like that is just a reflection on how much Bill has changed because of this person that he let into his life.
Yeah.
Just such a beautifully done job on the parts of them, exceptionally well with their performances. But of course, the writers and the filmmakers behind this, there's just so many incredible moments. I think my favorite moment from this episode might have been at the piano when you see Frank walk over. He already knows that there's probably some songbooks underneath the seat. So let me open up this seat to see what's in here. And then Bill opens up about his mother. And the way that Frank sings the song is totally different from how Bill sings it. They sing the exact same song, but in very different ways. And Bill does it from a much more vulnerable and sad place, like a long for love. And I think that was really kind of the moment where Frank knew, like, oh, this is something different. I want something out of this. I see something in this person, and I sense a love and a desire there, and I could possibly be that person for them. Were there any other like standout moments for you? I know we had Tess and Joel show up eventually to
Yep.
sort of have dinner with them, and we saw how that relationship developed, and we also got to see the booby traps. We didn't see how it
Yes.
played, but the booby traps were effectively used here. What were some of the other standout moments from you for you from just this whole sequence with Bill and Frank?
Yeah, shout out to booby traps. Those were crazy. They were just sleeping and people was on fire. I was like, what the heck is going
Getting
on?
electrocuted and everything. Like, goddamn.
I was just yelling outside. I thought it was low key funny. But man, one of my favorite parts, I think, is when, Bill tells Frank, he was like, there was like you said, this dude was built for the apocalypse. This is one of them dudes who like been stacking up beans for his whole life and like putting them in the shelter,
Oh,
kind of
COVID's
type
not
guy.
shit. It's not shit to him. He would
It
have
ain't
he would have
nothing.
outlasted COVID 10 times over.
It ain't nothing to him, man. But that was his thing for so long, right? And then the apocalypse finally arrives, and in some ways, he's like, "Well, I've done it," kind of type thing. Now, what's next? And there's that moment where he's talking to Frank, man, and he tells him, he's like, "You were my purpose." Boy, I almost
Wow.
threw something at the TV that was so goddamn good because his purpose had changed. The man had came into his life and made him his priority. Bill seen Frank as, oh, and now I have something else to care for. That's not just myself. Something else to care for. That's not waiting for an apocalypse to happen. I don't need, or you still need it, but I have a room of guns. Now it's time to, like you said, allow this man to come into my life and paint, and we're going to make strawberries, and we're going, you know what I'm saying? And it's crazy to let somebody in your life, and it turned into, just a beautiful experience. So when he told him that he was his purpose, I thought that was an amazing moment, man. That was one of my big takeaways.
Just such an excellent line, and so well delivered by Nick Offerman. And I think it just illuminates the fact that in this story in particular, and probably if we're being honest in real life, that sometimes the price of love is pain, because you are
Mm-hmm.
allowing yourself to become vulnerable. You're allowing yourself to completely expose and open up yourself to somebody else and trust them that that's
Yeah.
going to be your person and your partner for life. And that's what he did here with Frank. And because of that, there were vulnerabilities that Bill experienced that he otherwise wouldn't have experienced, such as meeting Joel and Tess and letting them in, or such as the Raiders showing up and trying to,
Mm-hmm.
infiltrate the compound. Like, Bill probably just would have taken care of that easy because he already had the booby traps. He had the guns ready to go. So he could have just fended them off himself. But now Frank becomes his protector because Bill ends up getting shot. So it almost becomes like this really twisted thing, where it's like, well, we thought it was going to go this way, but in actuality, like, that person is also simultaneously protecting you, and he has something to lose as well, even though
Mm-hmm.
he is probably more open than you have ever been. And that was just such an illuminating moment. And I just love that, we do get the interaction between Joel and Bill,
Mm-hmm.
and Joel sort of telling him, like, listen, you need other people to help you. We have things that you can't have here. Let us help you. Let's make some exchanges. Let's build a relationship here, because you do have somebody that you want to protect. It's not just you here, because if you just want to do a one-man stand down with the rest of the world, so be it. But that's not your situation anymore. So you have to not only live here, you have to preserve this lifestyle. You want to make sure that you can see it when you're older. And they ultimately do. Thankfully, we do see them grow old. And not Nick, Frank is sort of overtaken by, I would presume it's probably cancer of some sort. He
Mm-hmm.
eventually becomes sick and ill, and they misdirect us because you think that Bill's going to be kind of the person that might get sick and older first before Frank, but actually it's Frank.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Frank really can't use his limbs that much anymore. He has to utilize a wheelchair. He has to sip out of a sippy cup. It's very sad. They have lived, pretty long lives. I would surmise that they're probably in their 70s at this point. They
Yeah.
did use a lot of prosthetics and makeup to age them up, respectively. But this is, likely the most emotionally powerful piece of the episode, just because we see now them taking their destiny into their own hands, and they are having
Mm-hmm.
some agency in what their story is going to be. And Frank says, "This is my last day. I'm done. We have lived life. I'm ready to go out on my own terms." And he tells Bill, We're going to go over to the boutique shop. We're going to find some outfits. We're going to get
Mm-hmm.
married. We're going to have a great dinner. And then you're going to take these pills, crush them up, put them in my drink, and I'm just going to fall asleep in your arms. And that's going to be it. And we get to see all of that play out. And I was literally, I'm going to be honest. I was fucking crying this entire time watching this whole thing
Mm-hmm.
unfold because you know the end of what's to come. You just see like,
Yeah.
oh my God, like this is unreal. And it's beautiful and it's tragic at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they played it was just it was mind-boggling to see them just do this in such a beautifully tender way. And you could have really
Yeah.
messed this moment up, but they
Mm-hmm.
landed it. And then the final shot of them rolling into the room, all the lights are on, the glasses are still on the table. Bill doesn't bother to clean up. Like this is it for them. That is their final moment, which is a deviation from the game. You know, we don't see Bill die in the game.
Yep.
We do see Frank die, but well, we don't see him die, but it's implied that he dies and he killed him.
Mm-hmm.
But this is different totally. They essentially go out together on each other's terms and both, you know, die by suicide essentially, but they do so in the name of love and then in the name of just, you know, going out together as opposed to letting some other forces take out, you know, their lives for whatever reason.
Yeah, it makes the story so much more complete, I think. Or at least again, it both enhances the beauty and the tragic of very different from what the game did. The game, there wasn't a lot of beauty. In fact, you know, there's the letter that frankly is just like, bro, I don't even like you no more. Like, I'm out of here, kind of type thing that he leaves Bill. It's very much a different story. It was very, very sad story, but for it to end this way, for not only Frank to say I'm going, this is my last day, but for Bill to be like, no, you tripping. Use the last reason I had to live. I'm going too. what are you what are you
You're not
talking
about to just
about?
leave me here. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
what you thought this was, you kind of type thing. I really do love that because again, it services the story in such a different way. When the letter comes and it says take care of Tess, the way that their story is now kind of being shifted over to Ellie and Joel is so interesting. Now, to me, I feel like as I continue to watch the rest of the episodes, I'm like, man, remember when Bill and Frank did this thing? Now it's kind of applying to Ellie and Joel, right? In just a very different way. And what it means to accept that person into your life who can change your life, who can go on adventures together and all. I love it, man. I think they're doing it. They're doing it. They're doing a damn good job.
You know, you talk about the letter, which is another hugely pivotal piece of this, the suicide note, essentially, that Joel and Ellie discover. They do reach Bill's and Frank's compound, expecting them to be there and ultimately finding that they perished. And Ellie reads that note, and you have the moment of Bill writing, take care of Tess, do everything you can to protect her. And of course, Bill doesn't know that Tess has already died.
Mm-hmm.
And now how that's shifted to become Ellie as opposed to
Exactly.
Tess because she has died. And so now we have two extremely vital moments between both Tess and Bill. The two characters that Joel has probably let in only since the death of Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
who have told him she is now your purpose. That is who you need to live for. Bill did so by proxy of Tess, right? He doesn't know Ellie, but of course, like Tess can then translate to Ellie because that is the only person that Joel has left now. But we have two instances where the two people that were closest to Joel have essentially said, like, this is now what you are meant to do. You have to protect this young girl at all costs because her purpose is not only greater to society and to human nature, but also because of where you've been. And we know you and we know what you've lost and we know how closed off to the world you really are. You have to do some things that are going to be uncomfortable. You have to go outside of yourself and you're going to have to make some very, very tough decisions, but make sure to do whatever it is that needs to be done to make sure that person is going to be okay. And that reflects Bill. Bill and Joel are so much alike each other. They're really the
Mm-hmm.
same person, even though they don't like each other technically. Bill mentions that in the note, but they're very much similar in just the ways that their purpose has now been changed and driven by the existence of somebody else just naturally stumbling into their lives that they didn't
Yes.
anticipate. And in the game, you know, without getting into spoilers, there were some decisions made towards the end of the narrative where I think it's a little less ambiguous on how you may feel about it. You'll understand it, but from my vantage
Mm-hmm.
point, it's like, yo, you should not have done that shit, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't do that. But now coming into the series, it's only accentuated those decisions and why he's going to make the choices that he makes in the future. It's like
Exactly.
I really can't be mad at you I really can. I understand the bigger picture here, but
Hmm.
dude, like what you've been through in your journey has now just meant something so much more than any one person can really fathom unless they've walked your shoes. And so I'm really speechless by it because it's just all going to come around towards the end of the season. It's going to be explosive. It's going to be just absolutely
It
astonishing to
is.
see. And over the course of these next few weeks, we're going to see their journey continue. As we said, the relationship between Joel and Ellie is now starting to develop really, and we're seeing more of those moments at the end of this episode. Joel lays down the rules. He accepts his mission now, which he hadn't done up until this point. He tells her, "This is how it's going to be. You need to listen to me, follow the rules. Don't do this. Don't do this. Do what I say." She agrees and accepts it. They get in the car, they drive away, and we get the last shot, which is just beautiful, of the window that Bill and Frank left open. And we don't see their bodies, thankfully. They just imply what's there, which is just like the perfect way to end off. How do you see these next few weeks going? We've had this huge deviation. Do you think more bigger deviations are in store for us over the remainder of the season? Or do you think that probably from here on out, they might stick faithfully to what we saw in the video game?
I think again the overarching story for sure is going to remain the same, but I think a lot of these side uh uh I guess side characters, the people who Ellie and Joel come into contact with throughout their journey, I think they're gonna always slightly change up, what we've seen from them, because again the context is slightly different within the TV show. Even the fact that we could spend time with Frank and Bill, you know what I'm saying, is a kind of a blessing in itself. And I think there's a couple other characters, that we kind of talked about in previous episodes that might be able to be given a little bit more of that time. I don't think they'll go this deep into it. I think this was the one for them to say, okay, this is a foundation thing. But I definitely think we'll see them make a couple changes for those other characters at some point in the TV show. So yeah, a little bit, half and half, like again, overarching story. I don't think they'll change much, but stuff like this to make good TV, I think they definitely will.
I agree. I think that this was the one moment where they took all the agency to say we're changing a lot of shit here.
Mm-hmm.
This was their one moment, and I do anticipate that the rest of the story will mostly follow what we've seen in the video game. Of course, with enhancements, with subtle changes, with
Mm-hmm.
substitutions, with all that stuff. But I think that this is going to be the one example where we're like, that wasn't in the game, dog. But when you go back and play the game, or if you play the game for the first time and you maybe have watched the show for the first time before playing the game, I mean, what's that experience like to know this backstory and then that to
Yeah.
allow that to inform the video game, like the stuff that isn't
Mm-hmm.
said, but you can still use that information. So like now both of these things, the game and the TV series are both as a unit are becoming, I think, greater than the sum of their individual parts. Now it's a
Exactly.
really complete experience, which I just didn't anticipate coming into this, but they're doing so in such an amazing way. We should also quickly mention that season 2 has been officially renewed
Yep.
to the surprise of no one. We knew that that was coming, especially after we saw those numbers. You and I talked last week about, well, how are they going to do this? Is season one going to be the entire first game? Are they going to split it up? Are they going to make part two multiple seasons? I think we got
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more clarity on it because Neil Druckmann did indeed confirm that season two will start to adapt The Last of Us Part Two. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty clear now that they will wrap up the story of Game One within the season, which if we look at the pacing of how things are going right now, makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
The question then still remains, well, what happens with part two? That is a much bigger game from a narrative
Long game.
standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more characters that we have to meet. There's more worlds and environments. It's a lot that they have to do, and of course, they have to cast another huge lead in Abby. And if you
A
don't
buff
know
one at
about
that.
a very swole woman, I don't know how they're gonna pull that off. They're gonna have to find somebody, maybe a wrestler. But if you don't know Abby, don't look her up. If you don't want to be spoiled, just
Don't do
don't do it. You will.
it.
I swear to God, if you Google it, you're gonna be spoiled. So don't do it if you don't know what's gonna happen. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about season two coming? And how do you feel about just the nature of like how they're gonna tell that story once we do arrive to The Last of Us Part Two?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea where Last of Us Part One is the first season. Again, these are very much games with stories that are contained. Like Last of Us isn't like a 60-hour game, so I don't need, like, you know what I mean, the longest story in the world. Like, tell the story and get out of there, man, because that's what The Last of Us does. That's what the video games do. They tell the story. You kill some people. You kill some zombies. You know what I'm saying? You get out of there. And I think they'll follow suit there. Season two, I still have a feeling it. even if they don't do like a season 3, they'll do like a really long part 1 or something, and then a
Oh,
really
like split it
long,
up,
exactly.
but
It'll be
maybe
like
release
8 and
it.
8 or
Yeah,
something.
release it
Yeah,
like
or
8 months
like
apart, 6 months apart, something like that. Yeah,
yeah, because that's a lot. It
it's
really
massive.
is. It really is. Like, and I feel like I remember just be like, dang, this game long. Like, am I still here? And it wasn't even all like, action and stuff. It was like, dang, is this another cutscene? There's
Yeah.
flashbacks. I mean, there's a lot to that game. So, and I think, and I still have a feeling that the way we're watching this season play out, that they're want to stay true to a lot of those things. And so yeah, I think it'll just be longer season 2, but I really like the idea of telling the story just like the game, doing it with care, as we see this episode and these first 3 episodes has done, and getting out of there, man. So I think this is all sound good news to me.
Yeah, I do anticipate more episodes for season two. Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's 2 seasons, a split season, whatever the way and the method is of distribution, I don't think matters that much. But I do anticipate more episodes, anywhere between 12 to 14. To some extent.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm mostly interested in is perspective, because the part
Yeah,
two game is all about perspective. And
exactly.
it subverts expectations and makes you do things that you don't want to do. There is a clear divide. Is like, what the fuck? I
uh,
gotta do what? I gotta play as who? So I'm curious to see how they play with that and what that's gonna,
mm-hmm.
because I anticipate that's gonna be the big challenge. Like, how do you tell that story and create the perspective that feels like it makes sense, but also still communicates what needs to be communicated for all the characters involved, because you
Mm-hmm.
have to see all the sides to really understand the full scope of that story. So I'm very, very interested in how they carry that out. Lastly, before we close off here, we do have to acknowledge Annie Wershing, who in the weirdest circumstances has just passed away. If you don't know Annie Wershing, she actually did the voice and the performance capture for Tess in the video game for The Last of Us Part One, and she just passed away a couple of days ago due to a long battle with cancer. I'm very perplexed at this news, very saddened by it too, just because I I mean, it's just really, really, really ironic that the live action character in the series, met her in last week, and now just days after that, the person who brought this character to life in the video game, and we were introduced to in the video game by Annie Wershing, has just also sadly passed away. And she's also a St. Louis native, my hometown, so that's
Wow.
also something else to know. But really sad to see her go. She did have a couple of other pieces of work that she did across film and TV. I think she was in like Bruce Almighty at one point and was like an
Mm.
extra, did some stuff with Star Trek as well. So she was a working actress, but of course I think most people do know her for the voice and the performance capture of Tess. And so it's sad to see her go.
Yeah, man, she's only 45 at that. Which is crazy. I didn't Yeah, that's just wow. 45 to is insane, man. But like you said, the timing is crazy to me. Like the everything we just said after seeing the character, but and then the note that's like take care of
Oh
Tess
man.
is like, oh my goodness. She actually played a really big character as one of the parents in Runaways too. That's one of the big places I know her
That's
from,
right. I forgot
as
about that.
well. Yep. So yeah, really, really, really wild to see her go so young too, man. So rest in peace.
Absolutely. Well, folks, those are our thoughts on episode 3 of HBO's The Last of Us. If you've checked out this episode, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.